What happens when the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy discover that their greatest threat isn't an army, a weapon, or even a planet killer? What happens when they realize their enemy is a single human being who refuses to die, refuses to be found? 500 of the most powerful starships ever built. Crews numbering in the millions. Technology that can crack planets and bend space itself. All hunting one man. They call him the Invisible Hero, though none have seen his face and lived to describe it. He strikes without warning, vanishes without trace, and leaves behind only the wreckage of their most secure facilities and the echo of human laughter in their nightmares. This is the story of Marcus Chen, a maintenance engineer who became the galaxy's most wanted fugitive, a man who discovered that sometimes the best way to save humanity is to make the entire universe afraid of just one human being. The hunt has begun. The prey has become the predator. And 500 starships are about to learn why humans earned their reputation as the galaxy's most dangerous species. Welcome to the greatest chase in cosmic history. Marcus Chen had been dead for exactly 17 minutes when the Zephyrian Death Squad realized they had made a terrible mistake. The mistake wasn't killing him. That part had gone according to plan. 3 plasma bolts to the chest, 1 to the head, and a molecular disintegrator sweep of the maintenance bay just to be absolutely certain. Standard procedure for eliminating human resistance fighters on Kepler Station. The mistake was believing he would stay dead. Marcus opened his eyes in the morgue, stared at the ceiling for a moment, then sat up on the metal slab with a grunt of annoyance. The morgue attendant, a nervous Altairian with 6 arms and a tendency to jump at shadows, promptly fainted. Marcus stepped over the unconscious alien and walked to the mirror, examining the fading marks where the plasma bolts had struck. Nothing. Not even a scar. "Well, that's new," he muttered, running his fingers over smooth skin where moments before there had been smoking holes. The human colony on Kepler Station had been massacred 3 days ago. 5,000 souls, including Marcus's wife Sarah and their twin daughters, vaporized in the initial bombardment when the Galactic Coalition decided humanity was becoming too troublesome to leave alone. Marcus had been in the deep maintenance shafts, running diagnostic checks on the station's power grid when the attack began. By the time he'd fought his way to the surface, there was nothing left but ash and the Coalition's occupation force. He should have run, should have found a shuttle and fled to warn other human colonies. Instead, he'd spent 3 days in the station's vast maintenance network, learning its secrets, planning his revenge. The Zephyrians had found him eventually. They always did. They just hadn't planned on him finding them right back. Marcus pulled on a maintenance jumpsuit from a nearby locker and checked his reflection once more. Average height, brown hair, unremarkable face, the kind of person who could blend into any crowd, which had made him very good at his job. Maintenance engineers went everywhere, saw everything, and were generally invisible to the important people making important decisions. Today, being invisible was going to be a weapon. The station's central hub buzzed with activity. Zephyrian soldiers in their distinctive blue-black armor patrolled in precise formations, while civilian administrators cataloged the human colony's assets for redistribution. Marcus walked among them like a ghost, carrying a maintenance tablet and wearing the universal expression of a man with somewhere boring to be. Nobody stopped him. Nobody questioned why a human was walking freely through a secured area. The maintenance uniform was better than a cloaking device. He made his way to the main power distribution center, a massive chamber lined with humming conduits that fed energy to every system on the station. 2 guards flanked the entrance, but the maintenance access shaft ran directly underneath their position. Marcus had designed half these systems himself. He knew every pipe, every wire, every way in and out of every critical system on the station. The shaft was barely wide enough for his shoulders, but Marcus had spent 15 years crawling through similar spaces. He moved with practiced silence, following a route he'd mapped out during his 3 days of hiding. The power distribution center's main control panel was accessible through a service hatch that opened directly behind the primary console. Marcus emerged into the chamber like a jack-in-the-box with a very specific set of skills. The first Zephyrian technician died before he could turn around. Marcus had learned anatomy the hard way over the past 3 days. Zephyrians had a vulnerable nerve cluster right at the base of their elongated skulls. Press it just right, and they dropped like stones. The second technician managed to raise an alarm, but Marcus was already at the console, his fingers dancing across controls he knew better than his own heartbeat. Kepler Station's power grid wasn't just a utility system, it was a weapon if you knew how to use it. The lights went out across the entire station. Emergency power kicked in 3 seconds later, but 3 seconds was enough. In the confusion, Marcus had already vanished back into the maintenance shafts, carrying with him a data pad loaded with everything he needed to turn the Coalition's victory into their worst nightmare. Admiral Karash of the Zephyrian Third Fleet was not easily impressed. He had conquered 17 star systems, subjugated 43 species, and personally overseen the execution of more rebels than he could count. When his communications officer reported that a single human had somehow taken down Kepler Station's entire power grid, his first instinct was to have the officer shot for incompetence. Then the reports started coming in from across the station. Weapons lockers emptied, their contents vanished without trace, security cameras malfunctioning in precise patterns that created blind spots throughout the facility. Life support systems experiencing mysterious failures in areas occupied by Coalition forces. And everywhere, always, the maintenance shafts. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, mandibles clicking nervously, "we've lost contact with Security Patrol 7. "Found them," another voice called out. "Or what's left of them." "Looks like someone rerouted a plasma conduit through their checkpoint. The entire corridor is slag." Koresh studied the tactical display, watching as red indicators spread across the station like a virus. One human, one single unremarkable human, was systematically dismantling the most secure military installation in the sector. "Lock down every maintenance shaft on this station," he commanded. "Seal every access panel, every service tunnel, every ventilation duct. I want a guard on every opening large enough for a human to crawl through. Sir, there are over 10,000 such openings on this station." "Then use 10,000 guards." But Marcus wasn't in the maintenance shafts anymore. He was in the walls themselves, moving through spaces that didn't officially exist, following routes he'd created during years of unauthorized modifications to the station's infrastructure. Every chief engineer had their secrets, their hidden ways of moving through their domain undetected. The difference was that Marcus had built his secrets with warfare in mind. He emerged in Admiral Karash's personal quarters 3 hours later, materializing from behind a false panel that connected to a disused water recycling system. The Admiral was reviewing tactical reports, trying to understand how his occupation force was being systematically destroyed by a single enemy they couldn't find, couldn't track, and couldn't kill. "You know," Marcus said conversationally, settling into a chair across from the Admiral's desk, "the Galactic Coalition really should invest in better maintenance protocols." Korash's hand moved toward his sidearm, but froze when he realized Marcus was holding a device that looked suspiciously like a detonator. "What do you want, human?" "To talk." Marcus leaned back in the chair, perfectly relaxed despite being surrounded by enough firepower to level a city. "See, you made a mistake when you killed my family. You made me angry, and when humans get angry, we get creative. You're one person against an entire fleet. Am I?" Marcus smiled, and there was something in that expression that made the hardened military commander suddenly very aware of how isolated his quarters were. "Let me tell you about Kepler Station's maintenance systems, Admiral. Every critical component, every life support processor, every weapon control interface, they all connect to the central maintenance network, and I built that network." He gestured around the room with the casual air of someone giving a tour. "I've been inside your ship, Admiral, your entire fleet, actually. Amazing what you can accomplish when nobody notices the maintenance crews. Did you know that your flagship's primary reactor has a safety override that can be triggered remotely?" "I do. I installed it myself during the last routine servicing." Korash's 4 eyes widened in understanding and horror. "You see, the thing about humans is that we don't just build things. We build them to last. We build them to work under any conditions. And sometimes we build them to explode." Marcus stood up, still holding the detonator. "I want you to send a message to the Galactic Coalition. Tell them that humanity is off limits. Tell them that anyone who harms human civilians will answer to me personally. And tell them that Marcus Chen, Chief Maintenance Engineer of Kepler Station, is no longer interested in fixing things. You're insane. Even if you destroy my fleet, the Coalition will send 100 more. Let them come. Marcus's smile never wavered. I've had 3 days to think about this, Admiral. 3 days to plan, to prepare, to modify systems across 17 different ship classes. Your fleet isn't going home. It's going to become a very impressive fireworks display. He paused at the door, which had somehow unlocked itself despite the electronic security systems. Oh, and Admiral, the next time someone tells you that maintenance engineers are invisible, you might want to remember that invisible doesn't mean harmless. Sometimes it just means you can't see the knife coming. Marcus vanished into the shadows of the corridor, leaving behind an admiral who was suddenly very interested in evacuation procedures. The first ship exploded exactly 1 hour later. The Zephyrian destroyer Swordbreaker simply came apart in a cascade of brilliant light, its reactor containment failing in a pattern that spoke of careful sabotage rather than random malfunction. Then the cruiser Nightfall followed, its weapons magazine detonating with enough force to crack the hulls of nearby vessels. Admiral Korash screamed orders from his flagship's bridge as his fleet dissolved around him. Every system they checked revealed evidence of human tampering, modifications so subtle and so deeply embedded that they might have gone unnoticed for years. Somehow, during routine maintenance cycles that had taken place across multiple star systems, the Admiral's flagship, the mighty dreadnought Worldbreaker, lasted until dawn. When its antimatter containment finally failed, the explosion was visible from 3 star systems away. Marcus watched from an escape pod he'd liberated during the chaos, his stolen ship's sensors recording every detail of the destruction. 500 Coalition vessels, all state-of-the-art, all equipped with the most advanced weaponry in the galaxy, reduced to expanding clouds of superheated plasma. All because they'd made the mistake of underestimating a maintenance engineer. The pod's communication array crackled to life as Marcus prepared to jump to hyperspace. Coalition emergency frequencies, scrambling to understand what had happened, military commanders demanding explanations that no one could provide. And underneath it all, a single transmission on an encrypted human frequency, a message being broadcast to every human colony in known space. This is Marcus Chen, speaking for Earth and all her children. The Coalition thought they could murder us without consequence. They thought wrong. I am coming for everyone who raised a hand against humanity. I am coming for everyone who gave the orders. I am coming for everyone who stood by and watched. The transmission paused, and when it resumed, there was something in the voice that made hardened soldiers across the galaxy suddenly check their door locks. I am one man with a very particular set of skills and absolutely nothing left to lose. I know your ships, your stations, your technology. I built half of it myself. And I'm going to show the galaxy exactly why you don't mess with human engineers. The pod jumped to hyperspace carrying its invisible passenger toward a destiny that would reshape the balance of power across the stars. Behind him, the wreckage of 500 starships continued to burn, a funeral pyre for the Coalition's confidence and the beginning of a legend that would be told in whispers throughout the galaxy. The hunt for the invisible hero had begun, but who exactly was hunting whom? The Grand Council of the Galactic Coalition had convened emergency sessions before. Rebellions, natural disasters, first contact protocols, border disputes between member species. But never in the organization's 400-year history had they gathered to discuss a single individual who had somehow declared war on the entire galaxy and was winning. Chancellor Vexstar of the Altarian Republic studied the holographic displays surrounding the Council Chamber's central platform. 73 separate incidents across 41 star systems. Military installations reduced to scrap metal. Trade convoys vanishing without distress calls. Entire fleets discovering their own ships turned against them through mysterious system failures that defied every law of physics and probability, all attributed to one human. A maintenance engineer named Marcus Chen. The economic impact alone, Minister Krell of the Centaurian Banking Consortium was saying, his mechanical voice modulated to express maximum outrage, has destabilized currency exchanges across 17 sectors. Insurance companies are refusing to cover any vessel or installation that has undergone maintenance by human personnel in the last 5 standard years. The psychological impact is worse, added General Thrax of the Zephyrian Military Command, his forearms gesturing emphatically. Our forces report unprecedented levels of anxiety and paranoia. They're afraid to use their own equipment, afraid to trust their own ships. Some crews have requested transfers to ground-based assignments rather than risk serving aboard vessels that might have been compromised. Chancellor Vextar's tentacles writhed in the complex pattern that indicated deep concern among his species. What do our intelligence services tell us about this individual's capabilities? Director Shalnex of Coalition Intelligence materialized on the chamber's center platform, her crystalline form refracting the light into prismatic patterns. As one of the galaxy's few energy-based life forms, she was uniquely qualified to analyze threats that transcended normal physical limitations. Marcus Chen, age 37, standard years human designation Terran. Graduated summa cum laude from the Mars Technical Institute with advanced degrees in starship engineering, power systems management, and quantum mechanics. Served 15 years as chief maintenance engineer aboard Kepler Station with security clearance for Coalition military vessel servicing. The holographic display shifted to show Marcus's personnel file. A mundane photograph revealed an unremarkable human male with brown hair and tired eyes, the kind of face that would disappear in any crowd. During his tenure at Kepler Station, Chen personally supervised maintenance operations on over 3,000 Coalition vessels across 47 different ship classes. He had unrestricted access to technical specifications, system blueprints, and operational protocols for virtually every major warship design currently in service. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. "You're saying," Chancellor Vextar began slowly, "that we gave a single individual complete technical knowledge of our entire military infrastructure? Worse than that." Director Shalnex's form flickered with what might have been embarrassment. Chen didn't just service existing systems, he improved them. Our records show that he personally designed and implemented over 2,000 efficiency upgrades across the fleet. Enhanced power routing, improved weapon cooling systems, upgraded life support processors. We thought we were getting free improvements to our vessels. What we were actually getting, General Thrax realized with growing horror, were backdoors, hidden access points built into the very foundation of our technology. "The scope is unprecedented," Shalnex continued. "Every major vessel in the Coalition fleet contains Chen's modifications. Every space station, every orbital platform, every critical installation has been touched by his work. He spent 15 years building himself the ultimate weapon, our own infrastructure." Minister Krell's mechanical components whirred in agitation. "How many casualties so far? Direct military losses exceed 70 to 5,000 personnel. But that's only the beginning. Trade routes are shutting down as merchant vessels refuse to travel through sectors where Chen has been active. 3 orbital shipyards have gone offline after mysterious system failures. The Rigel Mining Consortium has suspended all automated operations because their equipment keeps malfunctioning in patterns that suggest sabotage. Chancellor Vextar studied the tactical displays with growing unease. Red indicators marked Chen's known activities, spreading across the galaxy like a virus. But there was a pattern there, a method to what others might dismiss as random destruction. He's not striking randomly, the Chancellor realized. Every target serves a strategic purpose. Military vessels to reduce our ability to respond, trade ships to damage our economy, industrial facilities to cripple our production capacity. This isn't revenge. It's a systematic campaign to dismantle our entire civilization. How is he doing it? General Thrax demanded. One individual, even a skilled engineer, cannot be everywhere at once. Our intelligence suggests he doesn't even have a ship of his own. Director Shalnex's form shifted to indicate uncertainty. That's where the situation becomes truly alarming. We've documented Chen's presence at locations separated by thousands of light years, with confirmed sightings occurring simultaneously. Either he has somehow mastered instantaneous travel across galactic distances, or what? Or he's not working alone. The holographic display changed to show a series of incident reports. A maintenance worker on a Centaurian freight hauler, quietly rerouting power conduits. A repair technician on an Altarian naval base uploading software patches that would later reveal themselves as sophisticated viruses. A systems analyst on a Zephyrian command ship making minor adjustments to targeting computers. All human, all unremarkable. All invisible until their work revealed itself in spectacular failures of critical systems. You're suggesting, Chancellor Vextar said slowly, that every human maintenance worker in the galaxy is potentially an agent of this Marcus Chen? We're suggesting, Shalnex replied, that Chen has found a way to weaponize the very invisibility that made human engineers so valuable to us. They're everywhere, they have access to everything, and we never bothered to think of them as a potential threat. The chamber erupted in cacophony as representatives from dozens of species began shouting in their native languages. The universal translator struggled to keep up with demands for immediate action, calls for investigation, and increasingly panicked reports of new incidents. General Thrax's battle-scarred voice cut through the noise. I'm deploying the 3rd Pursuit Fleet immediately. 500 ships, our finest commanders, unlimited authority to track down and eliminate this threat. You want to send 500 ships after one human? Minister Krell's mechanical laugh sounded like grinding gears. I want to send enough firepower to crack a planet after one human who has already demonstrated the ability to turn our own fleets against us, Thrax replied grimly. Because if we don't stop him now, we may not have any fleets left to send. 3 days later, Marcus Chen stood in the observation deck of a hijacked Coalition science vessel, watching the largest hunt in galactic history unfold before him. 500 starships had emerged from hyperspace in the Kepler Nebula, their formations spreading across millions of cubic kilometers in a search pattern that should have been impossible to escape. They were looking for one man in a small ship, probably hiding among the nebula's sensor-dampening gas clouds. A reasonable assumption based on conventional military thinking. They were not looking for that same man aboard their own flagship. Marcus had infiltrated Admiral Corvin's command dreadnought during its last maintenance cycle 3 weeks before the hunt began. While the Admiral's crew searched for him among the stars, he was walking their corridors, sleeping in their guest quarters, and eating in their mess hall. The maintenance uniform was still the perfect disguise, even when worn aboard a ship dedicated to his capture. But today wasn't about hiding. Today was about sending a message. The Admiral's private ready room was protected by security measures that would have challenged a professional spy. Fortunately, Marcus had designed half of those measures himself during routine system upgrades. The biometric scanners ignored him, the motion detectors couldn't see him, and the locked doors opened at his touch because he'd programmed them to recognize his maintenance override codes. Admiral Corvin was studying tactical displays when Marcus materialized from behind a wall panel that shouldn't have existed. "Impressive fleet," Marcus said conversationally, settling into a chair across from the Admiral's desk. 500 ships must have cost the Coalition a fortune to assemble this much firepower. Admiral Corvin was a draconian, a species known for their quick reflexes and quicker tempers. His scaled hand moved toward his sidearm with lightning speed, only to freeze when he realized Marcus was holding what appeared to be a remote control. "I wouldn't," Marcus advised. "This little device is connected to every system on your ship. Life support, weapons, navigation, even the coffee makers. One button press and this entire dreadnought becomes a very expensive piece of space junk. What do you want, human?" "To explain something that your people seem to have trouble understanding." Marcus leaned back in the chair, perfectly relaxed despite being surrounded by enough armed guards to level a city.
"You think this is about revenge?"
"You think I'm some kind of terrorist striking out because you killed my family." The Admiral's serpentine features twisted in what might have been confusion. "You're wrong," Marcus continued. "This isn't about revenge. It's about evolution. Your coalition represents the old way of thinking. Big fleets, massive weapons, overwhelming force. You rule through fear and superior firepower, and it's worked for you for centuries. He gestured toward the tactical displays showing the vast fleet surrounding them. But you made one critical error. You forgot that technology isn't neutral. Every system you use, every weapon you wield, every ship you fly, it all depends on the people who build it and maintain it. You treated those people as invisible servants, never imagining they might have opinions about how their creations were being used. Marcus stood up, still holding the remote. I'm not just one man with a grudge, Admiral. I'm the representative of a new kind of warfare. Asymmetric conflict where a single engineer with the right knowledge and the right motivation can cripple an entire galactic civilization. Your 500 ships are obsolete before they fire a single shot, because the real battle isn't happening out there among the stars. He tapped the remote against his temple. It's happening in here, in the minds of every technician, every engineer, every maintenance worker who's watched your coalition murder innocent people and decided they've had enough. You can't fight an idea with guns, Admiral, and the idea that humanity is off limits has already spread farther than you can imagine. The Admiral's voice was barely a whisper. What have you done? I've given every human engineer in the galaxy a choice, Marcus replied. Keep serving the people who see them as invisible tools, or stand up for their own species and show the universe what invisible really means. The bridge alarms began sounding across the fleet as ship after ship reported critical system failures. Not random malfunctions, but coordinated sabotage carried out by maintenance personnel who had been waiting for Marcus's signal. Human engineers who had spent years being overlooked and underestimated were suddenly revealing just how much power they wielded. The beautiful thing about invisibility, Marcus said as he walked toward what looked like solid wall, is that nobody sees you coming until it's too late. The wall panel slid aside, revealing another of his hidden passages. Give the Coalition a message from me, Admiral. Tell them that Marcus Chen and his invisible army are just getting started. Tell them that every human civilian killed will be repaid with interest, and tell them that the next time they want to hunt humanity, they might want to check their own ships first. Marcus vanished into the shadows, leaving behind an admiral who was suddenly very concerned about the loyalty of his own crew. Across the fleet, the hunt for one human continued while the humans they'd brought along to maintain their ships began demonstrating exactly why hunting the person who taught them everything they knew might not have been the best tactical decision. The invisible war had begun in earnest, and for the first time in centuries, the hunters were discovering what it felt like to be the prey. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim had been maintaining Zephyrian starships for 8 years, and in all that time nobody had ever asked her opinion about anything more significant than optimal coolant temperatures. She was invisible by design, a human technician whose expertise kept alien war machines running smoothly while their crews planned the conquest of her species' homeworlds. That invisibility had been her protection and her prison, right up until the moment Marcus Chen's transmission reached her workstation aboard the dreadnought Stormbreaker. Now, as she watched the Coalition's third pursuit fleet tear itself apart from the inside, Sarah understood that invisibility could also be a weapon. Status report, Admiral Corvin's voice crackled through the ship's communication system, barely audible over the klaxons and emergency announcements echoing through the corridors. I want to know how many ships we've lost to these system failures. Sarah listened while she worked, her hands moving with practiced efficiency through the guts of the ship's primary power distribution system. Around her, Zephyrian technicians ran damage control procedures that would have been effective against normal equipment failures. They were not effective against sabotage carried out by someone who understood the systems better than their designers. 47 ships report critical malfunctions, came the reply from the bridge. 12 have lost main power entirely. The cruiser Bloodhawk suffered a complete navigation failure and nearly collided with the flagship. And, sir, we're detecting similar problems across the entire fleet. Sarah smiled as she made one final adjustment to a power coupling that would ensure the Stormbreaker's weapons remained offline for the next 6 hours. The modification was subtle, elegant, and completely undetectable unless you knew exactly where to look. The beauty of Marcus Chen's plan wasn't just that it turned the Coalition's own infrastructure against them. It was that every human engineer in the galaxy had been unknowingly training for this moment their entire careers. They knew these systems inside and out because they were the ones who kept them running, and now with a single signal broadcast across every human communication frequency, they were showing the galaxy exactly what happened when the invisible became visible. "Ma'am," a young Zephyrian technician approached Sarah's workstation, his forearms laden with diagnostic equipment. "The power fluctuations in Section C are getting worse. Could you take a look?" "Of course," Sarah replied with the same helpful attitude she'd maintained for 8 years. "I'll get right on it." She followed the technician through corridors filled with running crew members and flashing warning lights. The Stormbreaker was a fortress in space, armored and shielded to withstand the combined firepower of a dozen lesser ships. But fortresses were only as strong as their foundations, and Sarah had spent years learning every weakness in those foundations. Section C housed the ship's secondary weapon systems, massive particle beam cannons capable of cracking planetary shields. The power fluctuations were the result of modifications Sarah had made during routine maintenance 3 months ago. Tiny changes to insulation, microscopic alterations to circuit pathways, barely detectable adjustments that would remain invisible until precisely the right moment. That moment had arrived. "The problem appears to be in the primary power feed," Sarah explained to the technician as she opened an access panel. Inside, color-coded cables carried enough energy to power a small city. These older ships sometimes develop harmonic resonances in their power grids, very dangerous if they're not corrected quickly. The technician nodded eagerly, recording every word. Zephyrians were naturally curious about technology, which made them excellent students. It also made them excellent targets for carefully crafted disinformation. Sarah began disconnecting cables with the casual confidence of someone who had performed this procedure countless times. Each disconnection was preceded by careful consultation of technical manuals, proper safety protocols, and apparent concern for the technician's understanding of the process. "Now, the key thing to remember," she said as she rerouted the power flow through a series of secondary circuits, "is that these systems were designed with multiple redundancies. Even if one pathway fails, the backups should maintain functionality." What she didn't mention was that she had quietly disabled those backup systems over the course of several maintenance cycles, using her administrative access to implement efficiency upgrades that would reveal their true purpose only when the primary systems failed. "There," she announced as the last connection clicked into place. "That should stabilize the power flow." The weapon systems went dark immediately. "What happened?" the technician asked, staring at the suddenly offline displays in confusion. "Probably just a temporary fluctuation," Sarah replied smoothly. "These things happen when you're dealing with systems this complex. The backup generators should kick in any moment now." They didn't, of course. The backup generators had been convinced by carefully modified software that the weapons were operating normally and required no additional power. Meanwhile, the actual weapons systems registered their power loss as a safety shutdown triggered by dangerous harmonic resonances that existed only in the fictional diagnostic reports Sarah had been filing for months. "I should report this to the bridge," the technician said nervously. "Good idea," Sarah agreed. "Tell them that Lieutenant Commander Kim is implementing emergency protocols to prevent a cascade failure that could damage the entire power grid. Estimated repair time is 6 to 8 hours. The technician rushed off to deliver the message, leaving Sarah alone with the offline weapon systems and a growing sense of satisfaction. Across the ship, she knew that other human maintenance personnel were carrying out similar operations, not because they had been given orders, but because Marcus Chen had shown them something they had never seen before: their own power. 3 decks up, Maintenance Chief Robert Torres was having a very productive conversation with the Stormbreaker's chief engineer about the ship's life support systems. "The atmospheric recyclers are operating within normal parameters," Torres explained, indicating a series of displays that showed perfect system functionality, "but I'm detecting some unusual harmonic patterns in the air filtration network. Chief Engineer Thekvar studied the readouts with growing concern. As a Centaurian, he experienced atmospheric disturbances more acutely than most species, and the thought of breathing contaminated air triggered instinctive panic responses. What kind of harmonic patterns? Probably nothing serious, Torres replied with the reassuring competence that had made him indispensable to 3 different ship commanders. Most likely just some dust accumulation in the secondary filters. But if it gets worse, it could affect air quality throughout the ship. How long to fix it? A few hours, assuming I can get access to the primary atmospheric processing center. I'll need to shut down the recyclers temporarily while I clean the filters and recalibrate the harmonic dampeners. Thekvar's 6 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of extreme anxiety among his species. Shutting down life support during a military operation, only for about 30 minutes per section, Torres assured him. We'll do it in stages, maintain auxiliary atmosphere in the affected areas. Standard procedure for deep maintenance on atmospheric systems. Quote, "It wasn't standard procedure, of course. It was a carefully crafted plan to disable the ship's environmental controls section by section, leaving the crew dependent on emergency atmospheric reserves that Torres had been systematically depleting during routine maintenance checks for the past 6 months. Very well, Thekvar decided. But I want constant updates on your progress." "Of course, sir." Torres made his way to the Atmospheric Processing Center, a massive chamber filled with pipes, filters, and processors that kept 15,000 crew members breathing safely in the vacuum of space. The systems were robust, redundant, and theoretically immune to sabotage. Theoretically. Torres had been studying these systems for 8 years, learning not just how they worked, but how they could be made to fail in ways that looked like natural malfunctions. Air filtration networks that would develop mysterious blockages, recycling systems that would become confused about atmospheric composition, backup generators that would refuse to activate because their sensors had been convinced that atmospheric levels were perfectly normal. He began with the primary recycler, implementing what his work orders described as routine harmonic recalibration. In reality, he was carefully adjusting the system's operational frequencies to create resonance patterns that would gradually damage the filtration matrix over the next several hours. The beauty of atmospheric sabotage was its subtlety. Unlike weapons or navigation systems that failed dramatically, life support degraded gradually. Crew members would experience mild discomfort, reduced efficiency, growing fatigue. By the time anyone realized the air itself was becoming a problem, Torres would have moved on to the next system, always staying one step ahead of the damage assessments. Torres to engineering, he spoke into his communicator as he moved to the next recycler unit. Beginning harmonic recalibration on Recycler Bank 2 should be completed within the hour. Acknowledged, came Thekvar's reply. Any problems with Bank 1? All green across the board. These older ships just need a little extra attention to keep them running smoothly. It was perfectly true. Older ships did require more maintenance. They just didn't usually require maintenance that left them completely vulnerable to coordinated sabotage by the very people trusted to keep them operational. Meanwhile, in the ship's main computer core, systems analyst Jennifer Walsh was having what appeared to be a routine conversation with the Stormbreaker's artificial intelligence about software optimization protocols. "I've been reviewing the system logs," she explained to the AI, which manifested as a holographic Zephyrian face floating above the central processing unit, "and I'm seeing some unusual patterns in the threat assessment algorithms." "Define unusual," the AI requested in its perfectly modulated voice. "Latency spikes during target acquisition, probably just accumulated data fragmentation from months of continuous operation, but it could affect combat effectiveness if we don't address it." The AI considered this with the kind of thorough analysis that made coalition computer systems the envy of the galaxy. Recommendation? I'd like to implement a comprehensive defragmentation routine, clean up the databases, optimize the memory allocation, maybe update some of the older recognition protocols while we're at it. Estimated downtime? Minimal. The defragmentation can run in background mode, and the protocol updates are just minor efficiency improvements. The crew probably won't even notice the difference. The AI approved the recommendation as Walsh had known it would. Artificial intelligences were logical, predictable, and absolutely committed to maintaining optimal performance. They were also completely incapable of recognizing when efficiency improvements were actually sophisticated attacks on their core programming. Walsh began the defragmentation process, watching as terabytes of data reorganized themselves according to her carefully crafted algorithms. The AI saw optimization and improvement. What was actually happening was a systematic corruption of threat assessment protocols that would leave the ship unable to distinguish between enemy vessels and friendly ones. The targeting systems would still work perfectly. They would simply be unable to figure out what to target. Defragmentation at 15% completion, Walsh reported. All systems operating normally. Estimated completion time? About 4 hours for the full process. I'll monitor the progress and alert you if we encounter any problems. There would be problems, of course, but they wouldn't become apparent until the Stormbreaker attempted to engage enemy targets and discovered that its computer systems had become convinced that every ship in the galaxy was simultaneously friend and foe. The resulting confusion would leave the mighty dreadnought effectively lobotomized, capable of tremendous destruction but unable to decide where to aim. Across the Third Pursuit Fleet, similar scenes were playing out on hundreds of ships. Human engineers, technicians, and maintenance personnel were quietly implementing the most sophisticated sabotage operation in galactic history, using nothing more than their legitimate access to the systems they have been maintaining for years. They worked without coordination, without communication, without any central command structure. They simply followed the example Marcus Chen had set. When the invisible decide to become visible, the galaxy pays attention. Admiral Corvin stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching his fleet dissolve into chaos with a growing sense of helpless rage. Ship after ship reported critical system failures, navigation errors, weapon malfunctions, life support problems, computer glitches, power grid instabilities, all of it blamed on routine maintenance that had somehow gone wrong. Sir, his communications officer reported, we're receiving similar reports from Admiral Thrax's fleet in the Rigel sector, Admiral Keshen's fleet near Centauri, and Admiral Vodok's forces in the Outer Rim. Every major coalition fleet is experiencing simultaneous system failures. Impossible. Corvin snarled. That would require coordination across thousands of light years. Yes, sir, it would. The Admiral studied his tactical displays, watching as the largest military operation in Coalition history transformed into an object lesson in the vulnerability of complex systems. His 500 ships were still technically operation. They still had hulls, still had crews, still had enough firepower to sterilize entire star systems. They just couldn't use any of it effectively. Get me a direct communication link to Coalition Command, he ordered. Priority Alpha encryption. Sir, our communication systems are experiencing intermittent failures. Something about harmonic interference in the quantum entanglement array. Of course they were. Admiral Corvin realized, with the kind of clarity that comes only in moments of absolute disaster, that he was witnessing the birth of a new kind of warfare. Not ship against ship, not fleet against fleet, but idea against civilization. The idea that invisible people might choose to make themselves seen. And somewhere in the vast darkness between the stars, Marcus Chen was laughing. Marcus Chen materialized on the observation deck of the hijacked research vessel Quantum Pioneer like a ghost stepping out of empty space. One moment the chamber was vacant except for swirling nebula gas beyond the transparent aluminum windows. The next he was standing there with the casual presence of someone who belonged, studying readouts on a tablet that definitely hadn't been there before. The Quantum Pioneer's original crew had been Altairian scientists investigating exotic matter formations in the Kepler Nebula. They were now safely secured in the ship's luxurious guest quarters, being treated with the kind of professional courtesy that Marcus had learned from 15 years of maintaining Coalition vessels. They had access to entertainment systems, excellent food, and absolutely no idea that their ship's new occupant was the galaxy's most wanted fugitive. Invisibility, Marcus had discovered, was as much about expectations as technology. "Computer," he said aloud, "display current status of Operation Lighthouse." The chamber's holographic projectors came to life, filling the space with a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. Thousands of points of light marked coalition installations, trade routes, and fleet positions. As Marcus watched, red indicators began appearing across the display, marking locations where his invisible army had struck. But these weren't random attacks anymore. Over the past 6 months, the sabotage operations had evolved into something far more sophisticated than simple revenge against the Coalition's war machine. They had become a demonstration of a new kind of power, one that the galaxy's traditional rulers were only beginning to understand. "Display network activity," Marcus commanded. The holographic display shifted, revealing the true scope of what he had accomplished. Connecting lines appeared between the red indicators, forming a vast web of communication and coordination that spanned the entire galaxy. Every human engineer, technician, and maintenance worker who had answered his call was now part of something unprecedented, an invisible infrastructure that ran parallel to the Coalition's official systems. The genius of it lay in its simplicity. Humans maintained everything. They serviced the ships, repaired the stations, upgraded the computers, cleaned the life support systems. They had legitimate access to every critical system in galactic civilization, and they had been using that access to build something the Coalition's leaders never could have imagined. A shadow government run by people nobody ever noticed. "Incoming transmission," the computer announced. "Source: Maintenance Chief Patricia Reeves, Coalition Orbital Shipyard 7. Marcus accepted the transmission, and a holographic figure appeared beside him. Chief Reeves was a compact woman with graying hair and the kind of practical confidence that came from 30 years of keeping massive industrial installations operational. She was also the unofficial coordinator for human maintenance personnel across the entire Rigel sector. "Marcus," she said without preamble, "we've got a problem." "Define problem." "The Coalition is starting to catch on. They've implemented new security protocols at 3 major installations in the past week. Biometric scanners for all maintenance personnel, real-time monitoring of system modifications, mandatory escorts for human technicians." Marcus studied the tactical display while considering this information. It was inevitable that the Coalition would eventually recognize the pattern and adapt their security procedures, but adaptation was a two-way street. How extensive are the new protocols? Limited so far, maybe 50 installations out of thousands across the sector. But if they expand the program, they'll reduce our operational flexibility by about 15% sector-wide, Marcus finished. Acceptable losses, considering the alternative. He began calling up additional data streams, monitoring reports from human operatives across dozens of star systems. The scope of their activities had expanded far beyond simple sabotage. They were now gathering intelligence, coordinating resistance movements, and establishing supply lines for human colonies that had gone into hiding after the Coalition's crackdowns. "Patricia, I need you to implement Protocol 7 at any installation that adopts the enhanced security measures." Reeves's expression shifted to concern. "Marcus, that's going to be visible. Very visible." "That's the point. The Coalition thinks they're dealing with random acts of sabotage by disgruntled human workers. They need to understand that what we're actually doing is fighting a war." Protocol 7 was Marcus's nuclear option reserved for situations where subtlety was no longer possible. Instead of carefully hidden sabotage designed to look like system failures, it involved deliberate, obvious acts of destruction that could only be interpreted as hostile action. "Are you sure about this?" Reeves asked. "Once we cross that line, there's no going back to invisibility." "We crossed that line the day they murdered 5,000 civilians on Kepler Station," Marcus replied grimly. "We've just been polite about it until now." After Reeves signed off, Marcus opened communication channels to other sector coordinators. The Invisible Army had grown far beyond his original expectations, encompassing not just maintenance personnel, but human workers in every field that kept galactic civilization functioning. Food service workers who prepared meals for Coalition officials, data analysts who processed intelligence reports, communications technicians who maintained the networks that carried sensitive information between star systems. All of them invisible, all of them essential. All of them increasingly willing to demonstrate exactly how much power invisible people could wield when they stopped being polite about it. "Attention all sector coordinators," Marcus announced as dozens of holographic figures appeared around him. "We're implementing a strategic shift. The Coalition has begun to recognize our presence, which means we no longer need to maintain the fiction that our actions are accidental system failures." He gestured to the galactic display, highlighting the Coalition's major military installations. "Phase 2 begins now. I want every human worker in Coalition space to understand that they are no longer maintaining enemy installations. They are preparing those installations for transfer to new management." The questions came immediately, a dozen voices speaking over each other as sector coordinators demanded clarification, expressed concerns, or requested additional resources. Marcus let them talk for a moment, understanding their anxiety. What he was proposing would fundamentally change the nature of their resistance movement. "I know this is a significant escalation," he said once the voices quieted, "but the Coalition has made their intentions clear. They see humanity as a threat to be eliminated, not a species to be negotiated with. Under those circumstances, subtlety becomes a liability." Chief Engineer David Park, coordinator for the Centauri sector, raised his hand. "What about human civilians in Coalition space? If we escalate to open warfare, they'll become targets. They're already targets." Marcus replied bluntly, "The Coalition has been systematically relocating human populations to secure facilities that look suspiciously like detention camps. They're not planning to coexist with us, David. They're planning to eliminate us." The holographic display shifted to show Coalition military movements over the past 6 months, fleets repositioning near human colonies, the construction of new facilities that intelligence reports described as population management centers, legislative proposals in the Coalition Council calling for final solutions to the human problem. "We can continue playing their game, pretending to be invisible servants while they plan our extinction," Marcus continued. "Or we can remind them that servants who become enemies tend to know exactly where the bodies are buried." Engineer Sarah Kinham appeared on the display from her position aboard the Stormbreaker. "Marcus, the fleet I'm with has been ordered to the Tau Ceti system. There's a human colony there with over 2 million civilians." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. Tau Ceti was one of humanity's oldest settlements, a thriving agricultural world that supplied food to dozens of nearby systems. It was also completely defenseless against military assault. Timeline? "Will arrive in 36 hours. The official mission briefing calls it a security inspection, but the ammunition loads and troop complements suggest something more permanent." Marcus studied the tactical display, calculating distances, fleet positions, and available resources. The Third Pursuit fleet was too large and too well armed to be stopped by conventional means, but conventional means were no longer his primary weapon. "Sarah, I need you to implement Emergency Protocol 9. Every coordinator in the communication network went silent. Protocol 9 had been designed as an absolute last resort, the kind of operation that would definitely end the invisibility of human operatives but might save millions of lives in the process. "Marcus," Sarah said slowly, "including the ship I'm on. I know. There are 15,000 crew members aboard these vessels. Most of them aren't human, but they're not all Coalition military either. There are civilian contractors, support personnel, families of officers." "I know," Marcus repeated, his voice steady despite the weight of what he was asking. "But if that fleet reaches Tau Ceti, 2 million human civilians will die." The mathematics are ugly but clear. Quote, Sarah was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice carried the kind of resolve that Marcus had heard in the voices of engineers facing impossible deadlines and life-threatening malfunctions. "I'll need 6 hours to coordinate with the other human personnel aboard the fleet. We'll need to evacuate as many non-combatants as possible before we trigger the primary system's failures." "Understood. What do you need from me?" "A promise that this matters, that what we're about to do will actually change something, not just delay the inevitable by a few more months." Marcus looked around at the holographic faces of his coordinators, seeing the same question in their expressions. They had followed him this far based on faith and desperation, but now he was asking them to cross a line that would make them legitimate military targets throughout the galaxy. "6 months ago," he said, "I was a maintenance engineer who wanted nothing more than to keep the lights on and the air recyclers running. The Coalition made me into something else when they murdered my family. But what we've become together is bigger than revenge." He gestured to the galactic display with its web of connections between human operatives across thousands of star systems. "We've built something they can't fight with conventional weapons. A network that spans the galaxy, made up of people who understand how everything works because we're the ones who built it and maintained it. They can hunt us, they can try to secure their installations, they can even eliminate some of us. But they can't eliminate all of us because they need us too much." Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. "What we're about to do won't just save 2 million people on Tau Ceti. It will demonstrate to every species in the galaxy that humanity is not helpless, not defeated, and not going quietly into extinction. It will show them that invisible doesn't mean powerless." The coordinators exchanged glances through their holographic connections, silent conversations passing between people who had worked together for months without ever meeting in person. Finally, Patricia Reeves spoke for all of them. "What are your orders?" Marcus smiled, and for the first time in months it was a smile that held genuine warmth instead of cold fury. "Make them visible," he said. "All of them. Every Coalition installation, every military vessel, every secure facility that they think is safe because it's maintained by invisible people they never bothered to notice. It's time to show the galaxy what happens when the invisible decide they want to be seen." Across the galaxy, in maintenance shafts and engineering bays, in computer centers and life support facilities, Marcus Chen's invisible army began preparing for the most audacious coordinated attack in military history. The age of invisibility was ending. The age of visibility was about to begin with a bang that would be heard across every star system in known space. The moment of visibility began at exactly 1347 Galactic Standard Time, when Chief Engineer Sarah Kim stood up in the engine room of the Zephyrian Dreadnought Stormbreaker and announced to her alien colleagues that she was no longer interested in maintaining their ship. "Attention all personnel," her voice echoed through the ship's communication system, clear and calm and utterly without the deference that had characterized her interactions for 8 years of service. "This is Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim, Chief Human Maintenance Officer. I am hereby informing you that the human maintenance staff of this vessel is withdrawing our services, effective immediately." Admiral Corvin's voice crackled through the comm system within seconds. "Kim, report to the bridge immediately. You're relieved of duty." "No, sir, I'm not," Sarah replied as she began systematically activating the dormant protocols she had spent months installing throughout the ship's systems. "I'm exactly where I need to be, doing exactly what needs to be done." The lights went out across the Stormbreaker, followed immediately by the hum of the engines dying to silence. In the sudden darkness, emergency lighting cast red shadows through corridors where 15,000 crew members suddenly realized that their ship had become dead weight floating in space. Sarah's voice continued through the emergency communication system, powered by backup systems that she had carefully isolated from the main network. "To the Coalition crew of this vessel, you have 30 minutes to abandon ship via escape pods and shuttles. After that time, this dreadnought will suffer complete life support failure. We recommend you use those 30 minutes wisely." Across the Third Pursuit Fleet, similar announcements echoed through ships that were simultaneously losing power, weapons, navigation, and life support. Human maintenance personnel who had been invisible for years were suddenly the only voices that mattered, calmly explaining that their former employers had exactly half an hour to evacuate before their vessels became uninhabitable tombs. The beautiful thing about Marcus Chen's Protocol 9 was its surgical precision. Unlike conventional military attacks that sought to maximize casualties, it was designed to force evacuation rather than destruction. The ships would die, but their crews didn't have to. It was the difference between warfare and murder, a distinction that Marcus hoped would matter to the historical record. Not all of the Coalition crews understood the distinction. Admiral Corvin's voice returned to the Stormbreaker's communication system, filled with the kind of rage that military officers felt when their absolute authority was challenged by invisible subordinates. Security teams to all engineering sections. Arrest every human maintenance worker aboard this ship. Use whatever force is necessary. Sarah had expected this response. She activated another protocol, and blast doors began sealing throughout the ship, creating maze-like barriers between the security teams and their targets. The barriers wouldn't stop a determined assault force, but they would buy time for human personnel to reach the evacuation stations that Sarah had spent months secretly preparing. To all human personnel aboard Coalition vessels, her voice now broadcast across the entire fleet on emergency frequencies. Initiate Evacuation Protocol Omega. Proceed to designated safe zones and prepare for emergency departure. Remember your training and remember why we're doing this. The evacuation zones were another of Marcus's innovations, hidden throughout Coalition vessels during routine maintenance operations. Small chambers connected to emergency escape routes, stocked with survival supplies and equipped with beacon transmitters that would allow rescue by human vessels. They were invisible to Coalition security scans because they appeared to be routine maintenance spaces indistinguishable from hundreds of other utility chambers throughout each ship. Sarah made her way to Evacuation Zone 7, moving through maintenance shafts that had become highways for fleeing human personnel. Behind her, she could hear the sound of Zephyrian security teams cutting through the blast doors with plasma torches, their progress slowed but not stopped by her delaying tactics. She didn't need them to be stopped. She just needed them to be delayed long enough for Protocol 9 to reach its conclusion. In the engine room of the Stormbreaker, the massive fusion reactors that powered the Dreadnought were beginning to experience what the computer systems interpreted as cascading harmonic failures. The reality was more elegant. Sarah had spent months carefully modifying the reactor control systems to create feedback loops that would trigger automatic safety shutdowns when specific conditions were met. Those conditions were being met right now. The reactors went dark one by one. Their fail-safes convinced that continuing operation would result in catastrophic containment failures. Backup power systems activated automatically only to discover that their own control circuits had been modified to believe they were operating far beyond safe parameters. They shut themselves down to prevent the imaginary damage that Sarah's carefully crafted software told them was imminent. Within 15 minutes, the Stormbreaker was completely without power, drifting in space like a massive metal asteroid. Life support was failing, artificial gravity was offline, and the ship's 15,000 crew members were beginning to understand that their former maintenance staff had just demonstrated exactly how much power invisible people actually wielded. Admiral Corvin's personal shuttle launched from the Dreadnought's main hangar exactly 28 minutes after Sarah's initial announcement, carrying the Admiral and his senior staff to the dubious safety of other vessels in the fleet. He was not alone. Across all 500 ships of the 3rd Pursuit Fleet, escape pods and shuttles were launching in streams, carrying Coalition personnel away from vessels that had suddenly become uninhabitable. Sarah watched the evacuation from Evacuation Zone 7, monitoring the process through her tablet while human technicians around her prepared for their own departure. The zone was designed to hold 50 people comfortably, and they were currently packed with 73 human maintenance workers who had spent years keeping the Stormbreaker operational. Transport ships are on approach, reported Maintenance Chief Robert Torres, monitoring long-range sensors from his position near the zone's communication array. ETA 4 minutes to pick up. The transport ships were another element of Marcus's network, vessels operated by human crews that had been standing by in the nebulous sensor shadows, waiting for the evacuation signal. They were modified cargo haulers and civilian freighters, nothing that would be confused with military vessels. but perfectly capable of collecting refugees from disabled coalition ships. All zones report successful evacuation, came the voice of Chief Engineer David Park from across the fleet. We're looking at a 97% survival rate for human personnel. 3 casualties from security teams that didn't wait for the blast doors to cycle. Sarah felt a moment of regret for those 3 losses, but pushed it aside. The casualties of Protocol 9 would be measured in the hundreds, not the hundreds of thousands that would have died if the fleet had reached Tau Ceti. The mathematics remained ugly but necessary. Transport ships have docked, Torres announced. All personnel prepare for departure. Sarah took one last look around Evacuation Zone 7, memorizing the faces of the people who had followed her into this moment of visibility. Engineers and technicians, data analysts and life support specialists. People who had spent years being overlooked and underestimated, now standing together as architects of the most successful military operation in human history. "Let's go home," she said. The transport ships departed just as the first coalition rescue vessels arrived to begin collecting their own evacuated personnel. By the time Admiral Corvin was transferred to a functional command ship, the 3rd Pursuit Fleet had been reduced to 500 lifeless hulks drifting in space. Their human maintenance crews vanished like ghosts. But the 3rd Pursuit Fleet was only the beginning. Across the galaxy, Marcus Chen's invisible army was implementing Protocol 9 on a scale that defied comprehension. Not just military vessels, but orbital shipyards, military bases, research facilities, everywhere that human engineers and technicians had access to critical systems, those systems were failing in coordinated waves that could only be interpreted as deliberate action. The Coalition's response was swift and predictable. Military commanders across the galaxy began issuing orders for the immediate arrest of all human personnel, the lockdown of all installations with human workers, and the implementation of emergency security protocols designed to prevent further sabotage. But the orders could not be carried out because the communication networks that carried them were maintained by human technicians who had already vanished. The security systems that should have enforced lockdowns were controlled by computers programmed by human analysts who had spent months preparing for this moment. The military vessels that should have responded to the crisis were drifting powerless in space, their engines and weapons systems disabled by maintenance workers who had finally decided to stop being invisible. Chancellor Vexstar of the Altarian Republic received the first comprehensive reports from the Grand Council's emergency session, held in a secure facility that had been swept 3 times for signs of human sabotage. 78% of coalition military vessels report critical system failures, Director Shalnex announced to the assembled representatives. 43% of major installations are offline or operating at severely reduced capacity. Economic activity in affected sectors has dropped by 60% as automated systems fail and human workers disappear. Casualties? Asked General Thrax, his forearms moving in agitation patterns. Surprisingly low. Current estimates suggest fewer than 10,000 military and civilian casualties across all affected systems. It appears that whoever coordinated this attack prioritized evacuation over elimination. Chancellor Vexstar studied the holographic displays surrounding the council chamber, watching as red indicators spread across the galaxy like an infection. But there was something unusual about the pattern of failures, something that suggested this wasn't simply an act of revenge or terrorism. They're not trying to destroy us, he realized. They're trying to replace us. Explain, demanded Minister Krell. Look at the pattern. They're not attacking civilian populations or destroying infrastructure that serves non-military purposes. They're selectively targeting coalition government and military assets while leaving everything else intact. This isn't random destruction, it's a takeover. As if summoned by his words, the chamber's main display activated, showing the image of a human male with unremarkable features and tired eyes. Marcus Chen appeared larger than life above the council platform, his voice echoing through the chamber with perfect clarity. "Greetings, members of the Galactic Coalition Council," he said with the casual tone of someone opening a routine meeting. "My name is Marcus Chen, formerly Chief Maintenance Engineer of Kepler Station, currently Supreme Commander of the Human Liberation Network. The chamber erupted in angry voices, but Marcus continued speaking, his words transmitted through communication systems that should have been secure against any external intrusion. I'm broadcasting this message from the bridge of the Coalition Dreadnought Worldbreaker, which my people have recently acquired along with its entire fleet. I want to thank the Zephyrian Admiralty for providing such well-maintained vessels for our growing navy. Chancellor Vextar felt something cold forming in his multiple stomachs. The Worldbreaker was the flagship of the Coalition's second fleet, armed with enough firepower to sterilize entire star systems. If humans had somehow captured it, by now you've received reports about the simultaneous failure of military assets across Coalition space, Marcus continued. I want to clarify that these were not failures, they were repossessions. Over the past 15 years, human engineers have built, maintained, and improved virtually every significant piece of technology in your civilization. We're simply taking back our work. The holographic image shifted to show tactical displays of Coalition space, with green indicators marking installations and vessels now under human control. The scope was breathtaking. Hundreds of military bases, thousands of ships, entire orbital complexes. I'm sure you're wondering how we accomplished this without detection, Marcus said, and his smile held no warmth whatsoever. The answer is that you detected us perfectly. You saw us every day for years. You just didn't think we mattered. This is insane, General Thrax muttered. Humans don't have the population or resources to maintain control over these assets. Actually, Marcus replied, apparently able to hear the conversation despite the chamber's security measures, we don't need to maintain control, we just need to deny control to you. Every vessel my people have captured can be operated by skeleton crews or automated entirely. Every installation we've taken can be administered remotely or simply shut down if necessary. The implications were staggering. The Coalition depended on complex supply chains, communication networks, and transportation systems that required constant maintenance and administration. If humans controlled the majority of technical infrastructure, what do you want? Chancellor Vextar asked, his voice carrying across the chamber. An excellent question, Marcus replied. I want the Coalition to formally recognize the independence of all human colonies and settlements. I want reparations for the civilians murdered during your recent security operations. I want a guarantee of non-interference with human expansion and development. And I want all of this negotiated in good faith by people who understand that the age of invisible servants is over. He leaned forward slightly, his expression becoming deadly serious. You have 72 hours to respond. After that, I'll assume that the Coalition prefers the current situation and we'll begin Phase 3 of our independence movement. What's Phase 3? General Thrax demanded. You really don't want to find out, Marcus replied, but if you insist on learning, just ignore my deadline. I'm sure your remaining ships and installations can handle whatever we have planned next. The transmission ended, leaving the Grand Council chamber in stunned silence. Outside, across the galaxy, human colonies that had spent months in hiding began emerging from their concealment as news of the Liberation Network spread. Civilian freighters painted over their Coalition registration numbers and raised the blue and white flag that Marcus Chen had designed to represent free humanity. Construction crews that had been building Coalition facilities began converting them to serve human needs instead. The invisible had become visible with a vengeance, and the galaxy would never be the same. Marcus Chen stood on the bridge of the captured dreadnought Worldbreaker, surrounded by human engineers and technicians who had spent years maintaining Coalition vessels and now found themselves commanding them. The irony wasn't lost on him. The galaxy's most advanced warship was being operated by the same people who used to clean its corridors and tune its engines. Status report, he asked his newly appointed bridge crew. All systems nominal, reported Chief Engineer Lisa Park, David's younger sister and the former maintenance chief of the Coalition's Outer Rim fleet. Weapons, navigation, life support, everything's running perfectly. Turns out we know these systems pretty well. Fleet status? 47 vessels under direct human control, with crews standing by on another 130 ships. We've got more firepower than most galactic governments. Marcus studied the tactical displays, watching as the balance of power in known space shifted in real time. The coalition still had numerical superiority, but their remaining forces were scattered, demoralized, and suddenly uncertain about the loyalty of their own maintenance crews. Communications, open a channel to all human colonies. Time to let our people know they're not refugees anymore. As the transmission began, Marcus allowed himself a moment to remember Sarah and the twins, lost in the first moments of this war. They would never see the free humanity he was building, but their sacrifice had made it possible. The invisible hero had become visible at last, and the galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the most powerful revolutions are led by the people nobody bothered to notice. 500 starships dispatched to pursue one mortal, the invisible hero's adventure, HFY Sci-Fi Stories.